Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the first of our technical training sessions, which we're going to be holding online in the last quarter of 2020. So good afternoon to all of you. Good morning to the guys in WA who are joining us. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Roz. I'm National Technical Manager for FAAC Australia, and we're going to talk today about FAAC remote controls made simple. All of your microphones have been muted, so if you do have any questions as we go along, please just type them into the chat box and I'll try and deal with them as we go along. So what we'll do today is we're going to, just want to quickly get this PowerPoint going. We're going to have a look at the two different types of transmitters, the RC versus the LSH, the different receiver types that FAAC offer, how we program these transmitters into those receivers. We'll touch on the remote programming of RC transmitters and then the deleting of transmitters. And that'll be followed by a Q&A if there are any questions at that point. So let's just touch on the RC transmitter. You'll all be familiar with this particular transmitter. It's a very popular unit. Every transmitter button on the RC remote has a unique fixed serial number that is transmitted every time a button is pressed. So that means that every transmitter button has to be individually programmed into the receiver and needs to be present at the receiver at the time of programming. So in essence, we press a button on the transmitter, it transmits a fixed code, and each time we subsequently press that button, the same code is being transmitted. It is a fixed serial number. The other thing just worth pointing out is I've highlighted the LED on this unit, which is red. So that's a very easy way to tell the difference between the two transmitters, the RC versus the SLH. The RC has a red LED and the SLH has a blue. In terms of RC transmitters, there are some older models which are showing on your screen now. One of them looks like a white SLH and the other is the blue remote. These are, they both perform in exactly the same way as the newer unit. They just look a little bit different, but what they all do have in common again is that red LED. If we move on to the SLH transmitter now, as you can see, I've highlighted the blue LED there. So this is also called a long-range transmitter, and there's a different philosophy when it comes to these transmitters. So basically, every new transmitter, as you purchase it out of the box, is a master transmitter, and it's programmed with a random site code that can be copied to other transmitters. So only one transmitter is ever programmed into the receiver on a site. And that receiver then takes on the site code of that master transmitter. And then all additional transmitters are cloned from that master. So in other words, the site code is effectively copied from that master remote to all the new remotes, which then contain that same site code and therefore operate the receiver. The other thing that's important with the SLH transmitter is that every transmission is different to the one before. So it's what we call a code hopping transmitter, which is a very secure form of transmitter. So we press a button and we transmit a code. The next time we press the button, you can see another code comes out completely different to the one before, and the next one and the next one and so on. So every transmission is unique, and that lends to a very secure remote control system. So we spoke about every transmitter being a master when it comes out of, and I just want to quickly talk about the difference between a master and a slave remote control when it comes to the SLH transmitters. So a master transmitter can be cloned to another master or slave transmitter, and it can be cloned from another master transmitter. So in other words, it has no restrictions whatsoever. Whereas a slave transmitter can be cloned from another master transmitter, but it cannot be cloned to another transmitter. So you cannot use a slave transmitter to create a new transmitter which will work in the system. So that's the restriction of the slave transmitter, and we will look at a moment in how we can actually convert a master transmitter into a slave. So we'll just watch a short video regarding how to tell the difference between a master and a slave. I just apologize for the sound quality of the video from the previous presentation this morning. Apparently the sound is not coming out very well. We will be working on that for the next presentation, but in the meanwhile, just see if you can make some sense of this video. Okay, so as you can see, just to summarize, when you press a button on the master transmitter, there's a brief flash of the blue LED followed by the blue LED coming on, and on a slave transmitter, you don't have that brief flash. So that's the easiest way to distinguish between the two. Okay, so we spoke about the ability of cloning master remote control. So in other words, creating new remote controls that will work on the same site that that master remote control works. And the cloning procedure is very simple, but sometimes does confuse people. Basically, you put a master transmitter into a teaching mode by pressing and holding buttons 1 and 2 for a few seconds until the blue LED starts to flash. You then release the buttons. And within 5 seconds, you press and hold the button that you wish to clone on that master remote control, and the blue LED comes on solid. You then bring that transmitter head to head with the new transmitter, and you press the button on the new transmitter that you want to clone. And you'll see on the blue transmitter, on the new transmitter, the blue LED will flash 3 times, and that indicates that the button has successfully been cloned. So I'll just quickly run this video for you, and you can see that process in action. Place your master remote control into teaching mode by pressing and holding buttons 1 and 2 until the LED starts to flash and release. Press and hold the button you wish to clone, and then getting your new remote control, bring it head to head to the master remote control and press and hold the same button. The LED will flash 3 times to indicate the button has been cloned. So your new remote control is now programmed. You release your old master and then press the button on your new remote control twice to activate the gate. So the important thing to note is the 3 flashes on the LED of the new transmitter, which indicates that it's picked up the new site code. And the other important thing is when you first use that newly cloned master transmitter, you will need to press the button twice to activate the gate. That's only on the very first time, and that has to do with this code hopping algorithm that I spoke about earlier. It does require 2 presses on the very first operation. Thereafter, it works on the first press as per normal. We're just going to touch on some special functions on these SLH remote controls. The first is how you actually convert a master transmitter to a slave. So you basically go through a series of button presses. So on a master transmitter, you press and hold button 1 and 2 simultaneously and release it. You'll see the LED will flash. You press again buttons 1 and 2 simultaneously and release it. You'll see the LED will flash but faster. You then press and release in sequence button 1, button 2, and button 1 again. And you'll see the blue LED flashes twice and turns off. And at the end of that process, that transmitter is now a slave. And what's important to know is that process cannot be reversed. Once a master is converted to a slave, it remains a slave forever going forward. So it is only able to be coded from another master transmitter, but it cannot be used to create a new transmitter on the site. The one that I didn't mention of this process of cloning is it allows you to add additional transmitters to a site without actually being on the site. As long as you have a remote control, a master remote control that works on that site, you can use that master to clone a new remote control, and you don't have to be at the site to do that. You just follow that cloning process. The person then takes that new remote control to site and activates it, basically presses it twice, and it codes in and the system starts to work. The other option is randomizing a transmitter. So this is where you've got a transmitter that already does work on a site, but you want to now have it to not work on that site. And so you're able to actually randomize the site code inside that transmitter. And you again do that with a series of button strokes. You hold down button 1 and 2 simultaneously and release till the LED flashes. You press 1 and 2 simultaneously and release again, the LED flashes faster. And then you press and release button 1, then button 2, and then you press 1 and 2 together. You get 2 flashes of the LED, and the transmitter is now randomized. So whatever site code was in there and was being recognized on that particular site is now random, and that remote control will no longer work on that site. But can be used, of course, on a new site and then be used to clone additional remote controls. Let's look at some of the receivers that we have on offer. So we have firstly the 5-pin receivers. These are used on our 740 sliding gate motors, our 746 and 844, and as well as our 851 sliders. This unit is compatible with RC transmitters only. And the way it works is it receives a radio transmission. So we press a button on the remote. There's a transmission that's received by this receiver. It's completely decoded on the receiver. And if it is a valid remote control, that receiver actually passes an open A command to the sliding gate motor to open. It's a trigger to the system. So what's important to note is that the transmitter buttons are actually stored on the receiver itself, on this RC receiver card. So if you remove that receiver card from the control board, you remove the remote controls with it. We then have a quick look at how we program this particular receiver. It's really very straightforward. We identify the learn button and the learn LED. We put the receiver into learning mode by just pressing the learn button until we see the red LED begin to flash. That indicates the receiver is now ready to learn a new button. And you just press the desired button on that RC transmitter. The red LED will stop flashing briefly. It'll indicate that the new button's been learned. And you can then add any further transmitter buttons in the same way. Now, after a period of time, that red LED will turn off, and that means the receiver is no longer in learning mode. Your new buttons will now immediately activate the gate. We look at the other 5-pin receiver, which is the SLH version of the one we've just looked at, and effectively that is also used on the 740, 46, 844, and 851 sliders. It is compatible with SLH transmitters only, and effectively in exactly the same way as the previous unit. We press a button, there's a transmission from the remote, it's decoded by the board, and if it's valid, it will present an open A signal to the control board, which will open the gate. And once again here, the transmitter buttons are stored on the receiver, so if you remove the receiver, you also remove the remote controls. How do we program this receiver? Effectively, fairly similar to the previous one. You identify the learn push button and the learn LED, but now SLH transmitter, we need to put it into teaching mode before we can actually code it into the receiver. And once again, we do that by pressing and holding buttons 1 and 2 on that transmitter until the blue LED begins to flash. You then release the buttons. You hold down the button you wish to program. So let's say button 1 in this instance. And you put the receiver into learn mode by pressing and holding down the learn push button. And the red LED will begin to flash, and then it will go solid to indicate that the button's been learned. And you can then release that learn push button. You wait for the red learn LED to turn off, and you then need to press that new transmitter twice. Is just to synchronize the hopping code, and the second time will actually activate the gate. And then any further transmitters are now cloned from that master transmitter. So you never learn any more transmitters into that receiver, only that first one to pass the site code to the receiver. Thereafter, all new transmitters are cloned from that master transmitter. There is a short video just showing that process. Again, apologies for the sound, and let's just see if you can pick up the process. So place a master transmitter into teaching mode by pressing and holding buttons 1 and 2 until the blue LED starts to flash. Then press and hold the button that you wish to code into the receiver, and then press and hold the button on the receiver module. A red LED will come on, go off, come on, go off. Can then release the button on the receiver, release the button on the transmitter, and it's coded in. The first time you press the button, nothing will happen. The second time you press the button, the gate operator will activate. Okay, the third type of receiver is the XR2 receiver, which is also known as the universal standalone receiver. And so this is typically used on third-party equipment. So let's say you have a FAAC sliding gate motor. The customer wants to use the same remote controls for the gate motor to also operate their garage doors. They can fit one of these receivers to the garage door system. It is a 2-channel receiver. It can be used with any equipment that has a 12 to 24 volt DC or AC power supply. It will work with either RC or SLH transmitters, and that OR is very important because it either works with the one type or the other. It will not work with both types together. And something that's worth mentioning is that up until now, the factory, when they've been manufacturing these receivers, have been testing them with an SLH remote control. And as a result, they haven't been erasing the unit after testing. And so these receivers have automatically been configured for use with an SLH transmitter. So there may be cases where you get to site, you try and program in an RC transmitter and it doesn't work. The reason is that there's already an SLH transmitter in the receiver, which makes it an SLH receiver. So you have to go through a deletion process, which we'll cover at the end of the presentation, delete the unit completely, which then sets it back to effectively factory defaults, and then you can learn your RC remote control. And from there forward, that receiver becomes an RC receiver. The 2-channel receiver has one pulse channel, and it has a channel that's either pulsed or latched, and you can select that with the dip switches on the receiver. And once again, the transmitter buttons are stored on the receiver. So everything is local to the receiver. We press a button, in this case on the transmitter, there's a transmission, the unit receives that transmission and then either activates channel 1 as a pulse channel, or you could, for example, code a second button into channel 2 and it will activate as a pulse or a latch channel as selected by dip switch 2, which is indicated with the red arrow. Dip switch 1 on these receivers has no function, so it can be ignored. So basically, if we want to program remote control, we basically briefly press the learn button on the receiver. Learn buttons. There's a learn button for channel 1 and a learn button for channel 2. You press the appropriate one, and the relevant red LED will begin to flash. You then press the desired button if it's an RC transmitter, or if it's SLH transmitter, you place it into teaching mode once again by pressing and holding buttons 1 and 2, and then you press the desired button. The red flashing light will go solid for 1 second, and that'll indicate that the button's been learnt. And thereafter, your RC remote will activate the relay, and with your SLH, once again, you'll just need to press twice the first time, and then the relay will be activated. So we have a short video clip here again, just showing how that process works. Place your transmitter into teaching mode by pressing and holding button 1 and 2 until the LED flashes. Press the relevant learn button on the receiver briefly, and the red LED will start to flash. Press and hold the button you wish to code. The red LED goes solid. Release the button and your remote is ready to use. The second time you press it will activate the receiver. All right, we'll move now on to the 3-pin or the XF433 receiver. Now, this is a very universal receiver. It's used on a number of products, the E024S and E124 24-volt swing control boards, the E045 and E145 basic and advanced 240-volt swing control boards, as well as the E721, which is the controller for the C720 and C721 sliders, and also the E614 and E680 boom gate controllers for the 614 and 680 boom gates, respectively. Now, this receiver is in fact compatible with both RC and SLH transmitters, and it's quite different to the previous ones we've looked at, because this receiver merely receives the radio transmission and then forwards the transmitter details to the controller, where all the processing takes place. So when these receivers are used, they don't store any transmitter buttons. They're merely a sort of a conduit between the remote control and the control board. And all of the buttons actually are stored on the control board itself. So you can remove this receiver and change it with having no impact on the remote controls in the system. You also can't expect to take this receiver off a control board, put it onto another control board, and have all the remote controls work. Because as I say, the remote controls are not stored on the unit. So again, in a sort of a graphical format, we press a button on the remote, there's a transmission, the receiver receives that transmission, decodes it, and effectively just sends a serial number or a hopping code to the control board, and it's dealt with on the control board. The way we program this receiver is dependent on the board that we're using. So in the event of an E024S board, there's a process to follow, and the same for the E124, the E045, and we'll go through those processes. So for a E024S control board, the first thing I always suggest doing is looking how many times the logic LED on this board is flashing, because the logic LED indicates the logic mode that the board is in. And when we learn a remote control, we need to interface with that logic push button, and that sometimes has the undesired effect of actually changing the logic mode. So make a note of the logic mode before you do the programming. Then in essence, you hold the logic button down. While you're holding it, you press the setup button, and the LED next to the setup will start to flash for about 5 seconds. You release the buttons, and during that 5-second window, if it's an RC transmitter you're coding, you just press the desired button that you want. If it's an SLH transmitter, you'll need to put it into teaching mode by pressing and holding button 1 and 2, releasing it, and then pressing the button you want to learn. Remember, you've only got 5 seconds to do this, so you've got to be fairly quick. And while you're doing this with any of the receivers, we suggest holding that transmitter at least half a meter away from the control board. If it's too close, you might have some issues where the remote doesn't want to learn. So the flashing LED will come on solid for a second, and that indicates the button's been learnt. And then within 5 seconds, you can then add an additional RC remote or an additional few RC remotes. And in essence, once the LED stops flashing, the remotes are coded. Check the logic LED, make sure it's flashing the desired number of times. If it isn't, just set it back to the original value. And then with the RC transmitter, will activate the gate immediately. And if it's an SLH, you will need to, again, press twice. So once again, here's a short video just showing the teaching of a remote control to an EO24S board.
To memorize the SLH transmitter, place it in transmit mode by pressing buttons 1 and 2 simultaneously. When the LED flashes, release the buttons and press only the button that you wish to memorize. Keep it pressed until the LED remains on steadily. While keeping it pressed, press and hold the logic button on the electronic control unit, and then immediately press the setup button. After a few seconds, release both buttons together with the transmitter button. To check that the transmitter has been memorized, press the button that has been memorized twice. If the OPA LED turns on, it means that the procedure has been carried out successfully.
Okay, so now we'll look at the XF433 and the E124 control board. And sorry, one thing I want to mention, just going back to the E024, is that the E024 will code either RC or SLH. So again, it cannot do both at the same time. And the first remote that's coded in determines the type of receiver. So if you code in an SLH, it's an SLH receiver. If you code in an RC, it's an RC receiver. If you're having a problem where a remote control won't code into the board, then the first thing to suspect is that a different type of remote control is already present on that control board. On the E124, we support what is known as Omni-Dec, and Omni-Dec actually is support for both RC and SLH transmitters. So far more convenient, and a number of our control boards will support the Omni-Dec system. So on the E124, we go into programming mode by pressing the R1 button until the R1 LED begins to flash. Within 20 seconds, either on an RC transmitter, we press the desired button, or again on an SLH transmitter, you put the transmitter into teaching mode by pressing 1 and 2 till the LED flashes, and then you press the desired button. The flashing LED will come on solid for a second to indicate that the button's been learnt, and once again the RC transmitter will immediately activate open A, whereas the SLH transmitter will need to be pressed twice. So here's a short video showing the coding of an SLH transmitter. Place your transmitter into teach mode by pressing and holding buttons 1 and 2 until the blue LED begins to flash. Then press R1 on the control board. The red LED will start to flash. Press and hold the button you wish to code. The red LED turns off, indicating the button has been learnt. Release the button and press the button once. Nothing will happen. Press the button a second time. The red light comes on, showing that the remote has been learnt. So as you'll see, different control boards, different methods. As you become familiar with one or other of these boards, it'll obviously become a lot more obvious when you're doing it repetitively. But unfortunately, there's not one solution fits all. And these programming methods, incidentally, are all covered quite extensively in the manuals for each of those controllers. So let's have a look now at the XF433 with the E045, which is the basic 240 volt controller. Also Omni-Dec in this case, so it can learn both RC and SLH. In this case, we press and hold the plus button on the control board until the radio 1 LED begins to flash. And then again, within 20 seconds on an RC remote, we press the button we want. On an SLH, we put it into teaching mode and then press the button we want. The flashing radio 1 LED will come on solid for a second to indicate that the remote's been learnt. And the same thing, the RC will work immediately. The SLH will need 2 presses. So let's have a quick look at this video. Will show you, in fact, learning in both an SLH and an RC into a E045. To teach your SLH transmitter to the open A function, press and hold the plus button for about 5 seconds until you see the red radio 1 LED start to flash. Put your transmitter into teaching mode by holding 1 and 2 down. Press the button you wish to learn and you'll see the flashing red LED goes solid and extinguishes. And at this point you can release the SLH transmitter and your remote is ready to use on the gate. To add an RC remote control to the open A function on the EO45, once again press and hold the plus button for about 5 seconds until you see the red radio 1 LED start to flash. Then all you do is simply press and hold the desired button on the RC transmitter. The red LED goes solid, indicating that the button has been learnt, and your button is now available to operate the gate. So the benefit of OmniDec is the fact that it supports both the RC and the SLH transmitters, and the real benefit there is when using one of our wireless XKPW keypads with a gate motor, because the XKPW in fact is uses the SLH method, the SLH protocol, and in cases this site may already have RC remote controls. This allows you to use both the RC remote controls and the XKPW keypad on the same site without an additional receiver. So let's have a quick look at the XF433 with the E721, which is this control board from the 720, 721 slide gates. Again, also OmniDec. In the case of this product, we need to press and hold the plus and the setup buttons at the same time until radio 1 LED begins to flash. And then again, within 20 seconds, press the button on your RC transmitter or put your SLH transmitter into teaching mode and press the button. So in this case, the radio 1 light will come on and indicate that the remote has been learned. Quick look at a video of a SLH into an E721. Place the transmitter into teach mode by pressing and holding buttons 1 and 2 until the blue LED begins to flash. Press the button that you wish to code into the Open A function on the E721, and then on the control board locate the plus and setup buttons. So press the plus button. While you're holding the plus button, press the setup button. The radio 1 light will start to flash, will then go out indicating the remote control has been learned. So again, fairly straightforward, but as I say, each control board has a different method, and you just need to become familiar with what those methods are, but it's not difficult to code them in. One thing I just want to touch on that I don't think too many people know about, and that is remote learning of RC transmitters. Now this applies obviously to RC transmitters only, and it's available with the XF433 receiver on the E024, the E124, the E045, and the E721. What it means is you can actually, if you've got a transmitter that is already working on a site, so in other words an existing transmitter, you can use that transmitter to put the control board into a learning mode to learn another RC transmitter. So you don't need to open up the control box or get access to the buttons or know the method of programming. So all you do is on an existing transmitter, you press and hold down buttons 1 and 2 simultaneously. And if you can see the control board, you'll see that the 2 radio lights on the control board will start to flash slowly. While those lights are flashing, you then press the button on that existing transmitter that corresponds to the channel you wish to learn, and the LED of that corresponding channel will now begin to flash. And during the time that LED is flashing, you press a button on the new remote control that you wish to code, and the LED of that corresponding channel will go solid to indicate the new button's been learned. So basically, it allows you to take an existing RC remote control from a site and use it to put the control board into a learning mode to learn a new remote control. So a little bit more convenient than perhaps having to open up and press the buttons. We'll lastly just touch on the deleting of transmitters, and again, differs from receiver to receiver. But line is these processes will the transmitters, and this process cannot be reversed. You can't selectively delete 1 remote or 2 remotes. It will remove everything from the receiver. So on the 5-pin receivers, you press and hold the learn button until the LED flashes rapidly and then turns solid. You release it and all the remotes will be deleted. The XR2 receiver, similar, you press and hold either of the learn buttons for channel 1 or channel 2, it doesn't matter, until the LED starts to flash rapidly and then turns on solid. Release the button, all the remotes are deleted. The XF433 receiver on the E024, you press and hold the logic or the speed button, it doesn't matter which one, and then while you're holding, you press the setup button until the radio LED flashes rapidly and then turns on solid. You release all the buttons, the remotes are deleted. If you're using an E045 or E124, you press and hold the minus button until the R1 and R2 LEDs flash rapidly. They then turn on solid, you release the buttons, the receiver is deleted. And on the E721, slightly more complicated, you press and hold the plus and minus buttons, and while you're holding them down, you briefly press the setup button. You then wait until the radio 1 and radio 2 rapidly, and then turn on solid. You release both buttons, and the receiver is completely deleted. Just remember again, this cannot be reversed. So once you've done that, all the remote controls have raised, and you then need to relearn in some new ones. So that basically brings us to the end of the presentation. If there's any questions now, as I say, I encourage you to just bring them up in your chat box. I'm just going to open up my chat box now and see if anyone is asking any questions. I don't seem to see any questions coming up. That would indicate that no one has any further questions. At any stage, if there are further questions, please feel free to contact us either telephonically or via email. We're always happy to answer any queries that you might have. We will also be making a copy of this presentation available. We will send a link out to everyone who has attended today. But in the interim, thanks very much for your time. Much appreciated, and hope that everybody learned something today. And have yourselves a good day further.